Welcome to Kids Stories, Chapter Books, and more. Today's chapter book is The Missing Girl by Gita V. Reddy. Narrated by Susie Hagel. Copyright 2021. Chapter 1. Missing. When the street lights came up, the children ended their game. It was time to go home. As soon as Samir entered the house, his mother called, "Call Sneha. She has a math test tomorrow." "Hasn't she come in?" Samir asked, a little surprised. "I didn't see her, so I thought she had gone ahead of me." "She must have gone to Minnie's house. Go and call her. She wants me to help her with algebra." When Samir went to Minnie's house, Minnie was surprised to know that Sneha was not home. "I didn't see her after we started playing hide and seek. I thought she'd gone home to study. She's trying to score the highest in tomorrow's test." Samir ran back home, wondering where Sneha could have gone. It had grown quite dark. Ma began calling up Sneha's friends. None of them had seen Sneha since the beginning of the game. "I hope your father comes home soon," Ma told Samir. "I'm not able to contact him on phone." "Mummy, shall we ask Uncle Manon to come over?" Uncle Manon was their neighbor. He came immediately, and so did his wife, Jaya. Minnie and her parents also arrived, along with two other neighbors. Everyone was worried and trying to decide what was to be done. Just then, Samir's father came in. "What's the matter, Sheila? Samir, is something wrong?" he asked, surprised at finding his neighbors gathered around his wife. "Sneha's missing." "What?" "She went out to play but didn't return. The other children haven't seen her anywhere. We've inquired with her friends. She isn't with any of them," Ma explained tearfully. "Samir, didn't Sneha play with you?" "She did. We played hide and seek. We lost our cricket ball, so there was nothing else to play." "Where did you all play?" "In the usual place, between the last two apartment blocks." "How's it you didn't see Sneha?" "We were all hiding. I didn't think she was missing. Later, when I didn't see her, I thought she'd already gone home." "What are the usual hiding places? Where do you hide?" "Anywhere, behind the apartment blocks, below the staircase, even on the terrace." "Samir, bring me the big flashlight. We'll check out all the hiding places," his father said. Samir ran to bring the torch. Uncle Manon brought another. A few more neighbors joined in. They went to each complex and looked below the staircase. They searched the passages and the terrace. They even looked for Sneha in the trees, though she was not fond of climbing them. They checked every nook and cranny suggested by Samir, Minnie, and the other children, but they did not find Sneha. They split up and visited all the apartments in the building, asking whether anyone had seen Sneha. Old Mrs. Mehta had. "I was sitting in the balcony and I saw Sneha. She was hiding behind a black car someone had parked by the side of the road. She saw me looking at her and put a finger to her lips. She wanted me to keep quiet about her hiding place." "What did you do?" "It was just that one moment. I went back to my book. I didn't look at Sneha or the other children after that." By now, many of the colony residents knew Sneha was missing. Some of them had also noticed the black car. They agreed with Mrs. Mehta that it looked different from the regular cars and resembled a vintage car. Samir's father looked grim. "I'm calling the police," he said. Ma started crying softly. Chapter 2. Far from Home. Sneha hid behind the car standing to one side of the road. She hadn't seen a car of that make before. The trunk had a round knob instead of the usual handle. She turned it out of curiosity, and the cover sprang open. Sneha heard footsteps coming to the car and the voices of her friends. They would find her. She looked around for another hiding place. The trunk of the car. 2 spare tires and a coil of rope left just enough space for her to hide. Sneha scrambled inside and lowered the lid. It almost hit her head. She leaned forward and twisted her body to fit in the tight space. Very soon, she was so uncomfortable that she decided to come out. Just then, the car started. Sneha called out loudly. She banged her fists on the trunk cover. Instead of stopping, the car picked up speed. Sneha tried to look for something heavy to hit against the roof of the trunk. But sitting crouched on the floor, she couldn't move the tires to look below them. The only light into the trunk came from a narrow gap where the lid came down. Sneha stopped calling out to the driver. Instead, she kept her eyes on the gap. All she could see was a narrow strip of the road, but it was something to look at. The car kept going at a fast speed. When the sound of traffic reduced, Sneha guessed they were out of the city and on the highway. Now the car went even faster. When it grew dark outside, Sneha could not see anything. Her body hurt from sitting in an awkward position. She rested her head on her arm and closed her eyes. The car came to a stop. Sneha heard the driver shut the door and walk away. She did not call out. Now that the car had stopped, she felt a little foolish for hiding in a parked car. Sneha waited until she heard nothing but silence and pushed open the lid. Holding it up was a struggle. Somehow she managed to stumble out. Her hands felt sore and her legs had cramps. One foot had gone numb. She leaned against the car and slowly began to feel better. She was in the driveway of a big, rambling house. The house was old and had many pillars and arches. Its heavy stonework gave it the appearance of a small fortress. Dry leaves covered the driveway. The house was surrounded by tall trees and big bushes that had been allowed to grow wild. A solitary yellow electric lamp glowed under the arch of the portico. Its dim light made the surroundings look more threatening, perhaps because it cast long shadows. The house was all dark except for the lights in 2 windows on the first floor. It was so silent that Sneha did not venture to the door. Instead, she decided to look for help outside. She would find a telephone and call her parents. They would come and get her. Sneha ran down the driveway to the gates. The gates were big and heavy. They did not have a latch or lock, but Sneha could not open them. She tried pushing and pulling them. She even threw herself against the metal rods, but it was of no use. The gates did not budge even an inch. The cold breeze and the silence made Sneha shiver. She did not know what to do. She did not want to go into the spooky house, but couldn't stay out in the garden either. It was like a small forest and might have scorpions and even snakes. Sneha went back to the house but did not knock on the door. She decided to spend the night on the porch and chose a corner that gave the most shelter from the cold breeze. But she was still cold and continued to shiver. She pulled up her legs and wrapped her arms around them. Resting her chin on her knees, she thought about the strangeness of her surroundings and wondered what everyone was doing at home. They must all be so worried. She wondered if she should knock and ask for help, but did not. The dark and the silent house scared her. Sneha was tired and hungry. For some time she listened to the sound of rustling leaves and the night insects. Then she dozed off. Chapter 3. Fruitless Search. After the police arrived, they again searched for Sneha and made inquiries with people in the locality. They couldn't get any new information. Inspector Singh suspected Sneha was kidnapped. "Mr. Roy," he said, "it looks like your daughter was whisked away in that black car. We spoke to all the residents on the street. None of them had a visitor who came in a car like the one that was seen. The presence of a strange vehicle points to a kidnapping. That was my worst fear. When we didn't find Sneha anywhere, I was afraid something like this could have happened. What's our next step, Inspector Singh?" "We'll set up roadblocks and send information to all the checkposts. Give me Sneha's description and her photographs." "Sneha's 11, but she's tall for her age. Her skin is light brown. Her eyes and hair are black. Her hair is long and curly." Mr. Roy gave Sneha's photograph to the inspector and described what Sneha was wearing when she went missing. "Do you have any enemies? Is there anyone who would want to hurt you and your family?" Mr. Roy was shocked. "I don't think so. I don't think I have enemies." "No offense meant, Mr. Roy. Sometimes children are kidnapped to get even with the parents. As you don't suspect anyone, this kidnapping must be for ransom, in which case the kidnapper will call you. Please try to extend the conversation. Don't annoy the kidnapper or argue with him. Don't mention the police. Agree to all his demands. I'll arrange to have all your incoming calls recorded. A policeman will be listening in, and we will trace the call." The inspector and his men left. Mr. Roy told his neighbors they should also go home. "It's getting late and the children must be hungry. I'll call if I need help." Only Uncle Manon and Aunt Jaya waited with the Roy family, sitting close to the telephone. What would it be? A call from the police or a call from the kidnappers? Chapter 4. Horror House. Sneha woke up and saw it was still dark. She was sure she hadn't slept for long. The mosquitoes buzzing around her must have woken her up. Or the cold. A rectangle of light came from the open window next to the porch. Someone was in there. She tiptoed to the window and peeped in. The sight within made her recoil in horror. A skeleton hung on a hook, grinning away. A light hung low, shining on white bones kept in glass cases. A big round glass bottle contained what looked like a coiled green snake. On the table, in a cauldron, red liquid bubbled. Blood. Sneha was terrified. What was this place so silent and frightening? A haunted house? She didn't believe in ghosts, but the strange house so silent and the room with all those horrible things was scary. She had to get out fast. A telephone rang somewhere close by. The unexpected sound made Sneha jump. She took a deep breath. "It's just a telephone," she told herself, and once again looked into the room. She saw it on a stand beside the window. A tiny red light glowed beside the digits. The light went off when the ringing stopped. Someone had taken the call on an extension line. The telephone reassured Sneha. It was proof that whatever skeletons and bones lay around, this was no ghost house. But no sooner she got a little of her courage back than a woman's scream shattered the silence. Sneha jerked away from the window and started running, and then stopped. The scream had come from the menacing darkness, not from the house. Another shriek came, and another. They were coming from different parts of the garden. Some sounded very close. Sneha went back to the corner of the porch. Once again, she sat down, her knees against her chest, and her back pressed to the wall. She didn't dare move a muscle. Only her eyes darted this way and that, trying to follow the shrill sounds coming from all directions. Strangely, no one came out of the house to find out why women were crying in the dark. Once again, Sneha wondered whether there were ghosts around. Were they up the trees? In the house? Was the telephone real or a trick by ghosts? Ghosts could do anything. They were supposed to be powerful. It would not be difficult for them to make a telephone appear. Another shriek, this time very close, brought Sneha to her feet. She screamed, except that with her throat gone dry and her vocal cords not working properly, it came out like a squeak. A small ball of feathers flew across the porch to a tree beside it. Sneha glimpsed large yellow eyes. It was an owl. Because of its mottled appearance, Sneha could barely make it out against the tree, but when the next cry came, she knew it was the owl's cry. Other owls answered it, and they all sounded like screams. Sneha had never seen or heard an owl before, but she recognized the bird from a lesson about night birds. It said owls were of different species, and the screeching owl sounded like a woman screaming. Relief flooded Sneha. No screaming women meant no ghosts, and the telephone was real. She went back to the window and put her arm through the bars. By standing on her toes and stretching her arm, she managed to pull the telephone closer and move it to the windowsill. Then, with trembling fingers, she dialed her home number. Chapter 5. Explosion. When the telephone rang, it was past 12. Mr. Roy grabbed the receiver. "Hello, Daddy? It's me, Sneha." "Sneha, where are you? Are you all right?" Mr. Roy demanded in a loud voice. "I'm all right. I don't know where I am. It's a big old house. The garden is overgrown, like a forest." "How far is the house?" "I'm not sure. I think the car took about 2 hours to get here," Sneha said. "Sneha, try and tell me more about the place." "Daddy, I can see a nameplate beside the door. I'll read it." Mr. Roy eagerly waited for Sneha to give him more information. Instead of Sneha's voice, he heard a loud sound, and then there was silence. "Sneha, speak to me. Hello? Sneha, are you all right?" "What happened? What happened to Sneha?" Mrs. Roy asked, taking the telephone receiver from her husband's hand. "She's safe, but she doesn't know where she is. I'm calling Inspector Singh." Inspector Singh was pleased. "This is a breakthrough. We know Sneha is in a house on the outskirts. The house is old and has a big overgrown garden. It's about 2 hours from here, and most importantly, there has been an explosion at the house." "Is this information enough to find my daughter?" Mr. Roy asked. "I'll pass on the information to all the suburban police stations. They already have a description of Sneha and the car. I'll alert the checkposts again. The kidnappers might move from their hideout." "Why?" "Because of the explosion. If they move out, we can nab them at one of the roadblocks." "Will anyone else be looking for Sneha?" 2 teams are already looking for her. I'll be joining the search with 2 constables. "May I come along? I'd like to be there when you find Sneha. She might be frightened," Mr. Roy asked, and was relieved when the inspector agreed. Inspector Singh contacted the suburban police stations. "Any complaint about an explosion?" he asked. There was none. "Very strange, but we shouldn't give up hope. There are many suburbs around the city. The explosion is a definite clue. I suspect the hand of a clever gang behind this. 5 other kidnappings have taken place in 6 months. The gang operates between states. It has managed to elude the police so far. But not this time. An explosion attracts attention. Someone will complain and we'll flush them out," the inspector told Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy nodded, though he was not really listening. He was worried about Sneha. Was she injured in the explosion? Chapter 6. A Peculiar Man. Sneha tried to read the nameplate beside the door. The light on the porch was dim, making it hard to read the letters. Just then, a loud explosion made Sneha jump. She screamed and started running away from the house. In her panic, she forgot that the gates were locked. She tripped and fell on her face. She tried to get back on her feet, but could not move 1 foot. Suddenly, bright lights flooded the garden. Someone had switched them on. Sneha felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned her head and found an old man looming over her. He looked friendly and kind. Sneha again tried to get up, but her foot was caught in an exposed root. Suddenly, everything was too much for her. Tired, hungry, frightened, and unable to get up, tears came into her eyes. The old man helped Sneha up. "Are you all right? Does your foot hurt? Can you walk?" he asked. Sneha took a couple of steps and found that she could. She quickly wiped away her tears. She disliked crying. "You have a cut on your forehead. I'll clean it and dress it. Come in and tell Sahib about yourself." Sneha looked at the house. Sahib meant boss. He looked kind, but his Sahib had a room with a skeleton. "No, I want to go home. Let me go home." "Don't be afraid, child. The fall and the explosion have frightened you. Come, I'll take you to Sahib. He'll drive you home immediately." Reluctantly, with the old man's arm around her, Sneha entered the house. Inside the room, Sneha found the results of the explosion everywhere. There was shattered glass on the floor, furniture was upturned, and splatters of red were on the wall and the floor. A man stood in the center of the room. He was tall and thin, very fair, with a mop of untidy silver-gray hair and shining bright eyes. The eyes and a hawk-like nose dominated his thin face. Dressed in red shirt and blue trousers with suspenders, and a purple silk scarf draped around his neck, he looked like a wizard in a storybook Sneha had read. She couldn't help staring at him. The man was smiling. In the midst of all the mess, he looked blissfully happy. Bits of plaster, probably brought down from the ceiling by the explosion, lay on his hair and clothes. He did not look up when Sneha and the old man came into the room. He was smiling to himself, happily engrossed in the smear of red on his hand. Sneha's companion touched the man's arm. "Sahib, this girl was outside. She'd fallen down in the garden. The explosion must have scared her." "Aha!" exclaimed the man, fixing his brilliant eyes on Sneha's face. "A little girl. Little girl, come closer. Come and see this. What's this on my hand? Tell me." Sneha stared at the smear of red on the man's hand. It must have come from that bubbling cauldron of blood. She turned her face away. "Sahib, the girl—" The old man started to speak. "The girl will stay here." The old man tried again. "Oh, her parents will be worried. You don't need her here. She must return home." "I need her here," the strange man said, smiling brightly at Sneha as she stared at his hand, smeared with red and coming closer. Chapter 7. The Professor. Sneha stared at the hand smeared in red. Seeing it up close, she realized the red liquid was paint and not blood. "This is paint," she said. The strange man beamed. "It's made out of weeds and clay. Come, I'll show you." "The child needs to have her cut attended to. I can't find the first aid box. I gave it to you yesterday, and the girl, where did she come from? We need to find out and take her back to her parents," the old man said. "Bulu, one problem at a time. The first aid box. Where did you give it to me?" "In this room." "If it hasn't gone up in the explosion, you'll find it here. What's next?" "The girl." "The girl is not a problem. The cut is the problem. Do something about it. We must have Band-Aids somewhere." The man turned to Sneha. "So, what's your favorite subject in school?" he asked. "Science and math." "Good. Mathematics is like truth. Only one answer. And science? What do you know about science?" Sneha was now totally at ease with the strange man. "Until last year we studied general science. Now I'm in the 7th standard and we have chemistry, physics, and life sciences." "Oh, no," exclaimed the man, throwing up his hands. "Child, don't make that mistake. Science is science. Don't put it into compartments. And if you have to do that, don't choose between the compartments. Come, I'll show you my lab." "Sahib, I found the first aid box," Bulu said. Bulu started cleaning the cut on Sneha's forehead. "How did you come here?" he asked. When Sneha told her tale, the strange man laughed. He said, "I was working on a problem. Sometimes my thoughts are clearer after a long drive. I took the car after lunch and drove around aimlessly for a few hours. When I saw the solution to the problem, I stopped the car to make notes. I must have stopped for 10 or 15 minutes. You must have slipped into the trunk during that time. I didn't know you were in there." Bolu looked at Sneha's puzzled face and smiled. "Sahib is a scientist. He's always finding problems and solving them." The scientist laughed and clapped Bolu on the back. "That's an excellent definition of a scientist." "Sir, may I use the telephone?" Sneha asked. "I want to inform my parent. They will be so worried." "The explosion killed the telephone," Bolu said, applying iodine to her cut. "I don't understand," Sneha said. "The phone is dead, so you can't ask your father to come and take you home. Sahib will have to drive you back. Before he does that, eat something. You must be very hungry." The scientist was engrossed in the paint. The paint is good, the weed, the so-called useless weed, and fine clay and glue, all ground together, filtered and boiled. That's this red paint, much cheaper than the paints in the market. This will help the common man. Fine. Fine until here, yet some time back it was brown. When did it turn red? Before, during, or after the explosion? That's the vital point. "Sir," said Sneha, slowly understanding. "Yes, you've got the point. Good." "The paint," Sneha said and gulped. "I was standing by the window before the explosion. The mixture was red then." "Good," said the scientist, approving, his eyes sparkling more brightly. "Good observation. Come now, let's calculate the heat and study what steps we should take so that the paint is not lost in an explosion." Sneha followed him to another room. Heaps of books lay on the table and floor. The Dewan had opened books and sheaves of paper. The scientist picked up a bunch from the clutter. "Now listen, child," he said as he jotted down. "We want to make a liter of paint. How much?" "1 liter, sir." "How will we do that?" Come on, you're doing excellently. What do we need? Come on."
I don't know," Sneha stammered.
"Then ask, child, ask. Always ask. That's the key to knowledge. We need the weed, 200 grams. Have you started on botanical names?"
"No."
"Fine. We'll call it a smelly green weed. That's what the botanical name means in Latin."
"How can a green weed give red paint?"
"Why not? Does not the green betel leaf, the green henna leaf give red color?"
Sneha watched, mesmerized, as the scientist quickly listed out different substances, some of which she'd never heard of before.
"So what is our problem, child? Tell me."
The brilliant eyes probed into Sneha, and without knowing how she did it, she said, "Explosion?"
"Right. We have to eliminate the explosion. We've nothing against explosions, do we?"
Sneha shook her head, and he continued.
"They're nice things. They keep us alert and shake us out of complacency. But in this case, they also splatter paint, and we don't want that. What should we change? Should we change the apparatus, or the temperature, or the ingredients?"
"The temperature," said Sneha, hoping she was right.
"Yes, we'll do that."
He went back to his calculations. He seemed to have forgotten Sneha, and Sneha forgot how late it was. She looked around the room. There was disorder everywhere except in one corner where several books were neatly arranged. Sneha read the titles: Medicinal Value of the Castor Seed Applications, Uses of Peanut in Industry, Natural Resins Applications, and Magnets for Health. The books were on astronomy, electromagnetism, and hybrid seeds. Bolu came in. "Sahib has written all those books," he said proudly. Sneha read the name of the author: Professor Satyendra Nayak. Chapter 8. Wonders. "So he is Professor Satyendra Nayak," thought Sneha. She had an essay written by him in her English textbook. The title was Science in the Vedas. Professor Nayak finished his calculation and set up the experiment again. He took a few green thorny leaves into a cauldron and added some other substances. After placing the vessel on an electric stove and adjusting the temperature, he told Sneha, "Come, I'll show you my lab." The house was almost a mansion. The lab consisted of half the rooms on the ground floor and all the rooms on the top floor. The professor used the rooms to perform experiments and to display scientific models. Walking through the house was like having a tour of a museum cum lab. Once again, Professor Nayak told Sneha that she should not put science into compartments. Because science is so vast, it has been divided into branches. This is only for the convenience of learning. The branches are like the different chapters of a book, the book of science. If you are studying physics, you must try to understand it in relation to other branches like chemistry or biology. They are all connected. Our body is an example. To understand how it works, one needs to use physics, chemistry, and biology. I have labs for all the branches of science here. Sometimes they overlap. Professor Nayak guided Sneha through the many rooms. He encouraged her to ask questions, and he answered all of them. Everything was new to Sneha, new and amazing. Instruments of various sizes and shapes were set up on work tables. "This is a powerful microscope. Look through it and tell me what you see, Professor Nayak told Sneha. Sneha brought her eye to the lens just like the professor showed her. She kept looking through it while he changed the slides. "What pretty flowers! Did you paint them?" she asked when he stopped. Professor Nayak laughed with delight. "Aren't they beautiful? They are cells from the animal and plant kingdom. The last one that you saw are cells from the retina of a human eye." "Are they? They look like white grass." Professor Nayak changed the slide. "Tell me what this is." "I see green and purple. It looks like a garden patch. What is it?" "Lung tissue." "And this?" "This looks like a flower petal resting on something." "It's a single red blood cell balanced on the tip of a needle." Sneha wanted to see more slides, but Professor Nayak led her to the next room. A shelf with colorful objects caught Sneha's eye. She picked up a small fish made of some hard material. "This room has kits for children. A friend uses my ideas to make fun toys and games. The fish you are holding is polymer-based. Do you know what a polymer is?" Sneha shook her head. "Do you know what a molecule is?" "A molecule is made of atoms," answered Sneha. "Right. A polymer is made up of molecules. Different molecules are combined in a lab to create a polymer. Unlike materials that exist in nature, polymers are designed in labs." Sneha nodded. "Why did you use a polymer to make the fish?" "This polymer swells in water. If you drop this fish into the water, it will swell after a few hours." He pointed to another shelf. "Those tubes have a polymer mix in a liquid state. When you squeeze the liquid into water, it turns into jelly and looks like wiggly worms." Professor Nayak showed Sneha some more items. Then he picked up a small wooden frame with 5 steel balls. "This was my favorite when I was your age." "What is it?" Sneha asked. "Newton's cradle. Do you know who Newton was?" "He once sat under a tree and observed an apple falling to the ground. He discovered—" Sneha stopped. She knew it was something to do with the earth, but could not explain what it was. Professor Nayak gave her a quick pat and smiled. "The apple story makes it easy to remember Newton, doesn't it?" Bolu came in just then. He overheard the last bit. "Apple? Shall I bring an apple for the child? She must be hungry. She didn't have dinner. Neither did you. You went into the lab immediately after you came in. But I am not worried about you. You are used to feeding on your ideas. The child is looking pale and tired, and no surprise about that. It's 4 in the morning. She hasn't eaten anything for hours. She hasn't slept either." Sneha was shocked. 4 in the morning. Her parents would be out of their minds with worry. She should have asked the professor to drive her home a long time ago. "Sir, I want to go home." Professor Nayak looked at her intently. "Bolu is right. You do look pale. We'll have a quick bite and I'll take you home." Without waiting for her answer, he strode into the dining room and checked what Bolu had kept in the cupboard dishes. He made a face. "Lentils, eggplant curry, rice, and chapati. This is boring fare. We must have something to celebrate the success of making a new kind of paint. Do you like chocolate and popcorn? Oranges?" Sneha smiled happily. She liked that Professor Nayak asked her opinion, as if she was a grown-up. Also, all the adults she knew were always telling kids to eat healthy stuff. The professor was the first grown-up who wanted chocolate. "Can we have only chocolate and popcorn?" she asked. "Of course we can. We'll sit outside. Some stars are the brightest at this hour. I'll point them out to you. Do you know physics is a branch of astronomy?" Chapter 9. Not an End. Inspector Singh stopped the jeep in front of a police station. "Has any explosion been reported to you?" he asked the officer on duty. "No, what's the matter?" Inspector Singh told him about the missing girl, the black car, and the explosion. The officer looked thoughtful. "Can it be our professor? He drives that type of car and is in the habit of making explosions." "But you haven't had any complaints," Inspector Singh said. "Oh, Professor Nayuk has no nearby neighbors. His house is in the middle of a large property. It has been in his family for many generations. But Professor Nayuk wouldn't kidnap a child. Anyway, you can meet him. Here is his address." Sneha was sitting on the porch steps and eating the wonderful meal. She asked, "Sir, what will you invent next?" "You tell me. I don't remember having invented anything for children. What will make life better for you?" Sneha couldn't think of anything. "May I take some time?" "You can tell me when we meet again." Sneha was thrilled. She would be coming again. She would explore that room of toys. There was a box of colorful spinning discs and solar-powered balls that looked very interesting. "May I also bring my friends and my brother?" she asked. "Why not? Have you finished? We'll take you home." Just then they heard a vehicle followed by loud voices and the ringing of a bell. "We have visitors," Professor Nayuk said, and took out a remote control from his pocket. He pressed a button. The gates swung open. "Why are the police here?" Bolu asked, coming out to see who had come. "That's my father with them. Daddy!" Sneha cried and rushed into Mr. Roy's arms. Mr. Roy hugged her tightly and then held her a little away and looked at her. "Are you all right? What's this dressing on your forehead? How did you get hurt?" "I had such a wonderful time," Sneha gushed and started describing her big adventure. Mr. Roy's relief at finding his daughter safe was so great that he did not scold her. Later, he would speak to her about the dangers she could have gotten into. He let her introduce the professor to them and happily chatter about his lab. For Sneha was happy and excited. She couldn't wait to tell Samir and Minnie about her experience. She also had a precious gift, Newton's cradle. Professor Nayuk had given it to her and explained how it demonstrated Newton's laws. She would show it to her friends and also read about it. There was another instrument she had liked very much. Its name rhymed with microscope. The thing had a wheel and spun in any direction. Gyroscope. She would read about it, too. She would start on other sciences. They were nothing but different chapters of one book, the Book of Science. The end. You have been listening to The Missing Girl by Gita V. Reddy. The short chapter book series is an attempt to inculcate the love of reading in all children, transitioning beginning readers to more advanced readers and reluctant readers into beginning readers